The reliability of Wikipedia concerns the validity, verifiability, and veracity of Wikipedia and its user-generated editing model, particularly its English-language edition. It is written and edited by volunteer editors who generate online content with the editorial oversight of other volunteer editors via community-generated policies and guidelines. Wikipedia carries the general disclaimer that it can be edited by anyone at any time and maintains an inclusion threshold of verifiability, not truth. This editing model is highly concentrated, as 77% of all articles are written by 1% of its editors, a majority of whom have chosen to remain anonymous. The reliability of the project has been tested statistically through comparative review, analysis of the historical patterns and strengths and weaknesses inherent in its editing process. The online encyclopedia has been criticized for its factual reliability, principally regarding its content, presentation, and editorial processes. Studies and surveys attempting to gauge the reliability of Wikipedia have mixed results, with findings varied and inconsistent. Wikipedia's reliability was frequently criticized in the 2000s but has improved over time. It has been generally praised in the late 2010s and early 2020s. Select assessments of its reliability have examined how quickly vandalism content perceived by editors to constitute false or misleading information is removed. 2 years after the project was started, in 2003, an IBM study found that vandalism is usually repaired extremely quickly, so quickly that most users will never see its effects. The inclusion of false or fabricated content has, at times, lasted for years on Wikipedia due to its volunteer editorship. Its editing model facilitates multiple systemic biases, namely, selection bias, inclusion bias, participation bias, and groupthink bias. The majority of the encyclopedia is written by male editors, leading to a gender bias in coverage, and the makeup of the editing community has prompted concerns about racial bias, spin bias, corporate bias, and national bias, among others. An ideological bias on Wikipedia has also been identified on both conscious and subconscious levels. A series of studies from Harvard Business School in 2012 and 2014 found Wikipedia significantly more biased than Encyclopaedia Britannica, but attributed the finding more to the length of the online encyclopedia as opposed to slanted editing. The prevalence of non-neutral or conflict of interest editing and the use of Wikipedia for revenge editing has attracted publicity for inserting false, biased, or defamatory content into articles, especially biographies of living people. Articles on less technical subjects, such as the social sciences, humanities, and culture, have been known to deal with misinformation cycles, cognitive biases, coverage discrepancies, and editor disputes. The online encyclopedia does not guarantee the validity of its information. It is seen as a valuable starting point for researchers when they pass over content to examine the listed references, citations, and sources. Academics suggest reviewing reliable sources when assessing the quality of articles. Its coverage of medical and scientific articles such as pathology, toxicology, oncology, pharmaceuticals, and psychiatry were compared to professional and peer-reviewed sources in a 2005 Nature study. A year later, Encyclopaedia Britannica disputed the Nature study, whose authors, in turn, replied with a further rebuttal. Concerns regarding readability and the overuse of technical language were raised in studies published by the American Society of Clinical Oncology, Psychological Medicine, and European Journal of Gastroenterology and Hepatology. Wikipedia's popularity, mass readership, and free accessibility has led the encyclopedia to command a substantial second-hand cognitive authority across the world. Plot summary. During a production of King Lear at the Elgin Theatre in Toronto, Jeevan watches as the actor playing Lear, Arthur Leander, has a heart attack. Since he has begun training as a paramedic, Jeevan tries to resuscitate Arthur, but is unsuccessful. Instead, Jeevan comforts one of the child actors in the production, Kirsten. After leaving the play, Jeevan goes for a walk in the snow and receives a call from a friend who is a doctor in Toronto. He warns Jeevan to get out of the city as the mysterious Georgia flu is spreading rapidly and will soon become a full-blown pandemic. Jeevan loads up on supplies and goes to stay with his brother, Frank. Many of the actors, actresses, and others that had gathered to mourn Arthur's death die within the next 3 weeks. 20 years later, Kirsten is part of a nomadic group of actors and musicians known as the Traveling Symphony. Kirsten, who was 8 at the time of the outbreak, can remember little of her life before year 0, but clings to a 2-volume set of graphic novels given to her by Arthur before his death, titled Station 11. The troupe operates on a 2-year cycle touring the Great Lakes region, performing Shakespeare plays and classical music, while Kirsten scavenges abandoned homes for props, costumes, and traces of Arthur in tabloid magazines. The troupe intends to reunite with 2 members they left behind, the pregnant Charlie, and her husband, Jeremy, at a small town. Upon arriving, they are disturbed to find that their friends are missing, and the town is now under the control of the prophet, who rapes the young girls he claims as his wives. The troupe quickly leaves, and goes off route to the Museum of Civilization, a settlement where they believe they might find their missing friends. En route, they discover a young stowaway who fled the town, as she was promised to the prophet as another bride. Shortly after, members of the troupe begin to disappear until finally the entire troupe is gone, leaving only Kirsten and her friend August. Frightened, they continue on to the museum, hoping to be reunited with others. Unbeknownst to Kirsten, Station 11 is an unpublished passion project by Arthur's first wife, Miranda. 14 years before the collapse of civilization, Miranda left an abusive relationship and married Arthur, a friend from her hometown in coastal British Columbia who has since become famous. As Arthur's fame as an actor hit its peak, Miranda realized he was having an affair with the woman who would become his second wife, Elizabeth. The night that Miranda discovers the affair, she walks out of her home and asks a paparazzo outside if he has a cigarette. The paparazzo turns out to be Jeevan. Years later, when Jeevan is trying to reinvent himself as an entertainment journalist, Arthur gives him an exclusive interview. He is leaving Elizabeth and their young son, Tyler, to be with another woman. Jeevan reflects on this while he and Frank are quarantining in Frank's apartment. After weeks, they realize that no one is coming to save them. Frank, who is paraplegic, dies by suicide to spare Jeevan from feeling responsible for him. Jeevan embarks on a journey south, and after many years, finds a new settlement where he marries and becomes the town doctor. In year 0, one of Arthur's friends, Clark, informs Elizabeth that Arthur is dead. Clark, Elizabeth, and Tyler happen to be on the same flight from New York City to Toronto to attend Arthur's funeral, until it is grounded at the Severn City Airport due to the pandemic. The passengers, having nowhere to go, create a settlement in the airport, and Clark becomes the curator of the Museum of Civilization, where he gathers artifacts such as iPhones and laptop computers. While most of the airport survivors adapt to their new life, Elizabeth and Tyler embrace religious zealotry, believing that the pandemic happened for a reason and spared those who were good. After 2 years, they leave with a religious cult. In the present, Kirsten and August find a group of the prophet's men holding Saeed, a member of their troupe, hostage. They kill the men and free Saeed, who explains that their friend Dieter was killed, while another hostage escaped, warned the troupe, and sent them on another road, explaining how they went missing. The trio leave for the Severn City Airport, but Kirsten is soon discovered by the prophet. Just before he is about to kill her, he refers to the Undersea, a place from the Station 11 comics. Kirsten quotes lines from Station 11, distracting the prophet long enough that a younger sentry shoots and kills him, before taking his own life. The trio continues to the Museum of Civilization, where they are reunited with Charlie, Jeremy, and the rest of the troupe. Clark, who has lived in the museum for 20 years, realizes who Kirsten is, her attachment to Arthur, and that the prophet was Tyler Leander. Clark takes Kirsten up to the control tower of the airport, where through a telescope he shows her there is a town to the south with electric lights, suggesting that civilization is beginning to take root again. 5 weeks later, Kirsten leaves with the traveling symphony for the town to the south. She gives one copy of Station 11 to Clark's museum. He begins to read it and recognizes a scene that is borrowed from a dinner party which he, Arthur and Miranda once attended. Main characters: Kirsten Raymond, a former child actor from Toronto who is 8 when the Georgia flu destroys her world. Initially she and her brother are the only survivors in her family, but as they travel, he dies too. She joins the traveling symphony as a teenager and becomes obsessed with actor Arthur Leander, whose death she witnessed as a child. Arthur Leander, a wildly successful film actor originally from the Delano Island in British Columbia. Despite his success, Arthur is shiftless, unhappy, and marries 3 times. He dies on stage of a heart attack portraying King Lear at age 51, the same night the pandemic takes hold. Jeevan Chaudhary, a former paparazzo, turned entertainment journalist, turned EMT, whose life intersects with Leander's at key moments. Frank Chaudhary, Jeevan's paraplegic brother, a former combat reporter wounded in Afghanistan, now a ghostwriter who lives a life of solitude in his apartment. Miranda Carroll, Arthur's first wife, 11 years his junior. She is initially an artist who is obsessed with creating her graphic novel, Station 11, about Dr. 11, a man who lives on a defunct planetary space station. She later becomes a proficient businesswoman. Shortly before Arthur's death, Miranda gives him 2 copies of the finally completed graphic novel, which Arthur gives to his son, Tyler, and then child Kirsten. Mondell has said Miranda is the character she most identifies with. Clark Thompson, Arthur's English best friend, whom he met while they were struggling actors. He then works as a corporate businessman, and post-collapse, reinvents himself as a curator to a museum of obsolete objects. Tyler Leander, the son of Arthur and his second wife Elizabeth. He grows up in Jerusalem, estranged from his father, and is later stranded in the settlement at the Severn City Airport. He and his mother eventually leave with a religious cult, and he grows up to be the religious leader known as the Prophet. Genre: although many publications classified the novel as science fiction, Mondell does not believe that the work belongs to that genre, as the novel does not include any instances of fictional technology. She said the issue of labeling her work science fiction has followed her through all her novels. Her early work was classified as crime fiction, and she has stated she consciously chose to avoid overtones of mystery and crime in this work in order to avoid being pigeonholed as a mystery novelist.